Okay, well, we've had a few people join us today, which is fantastic. It's lovely to see some familiar alumni names and some new names joining us. So welcome to DFI's first webinar for 2020. It's great to be back and be back in series. We are going to be talking today about with GSMA and the IRC regarding using mobile money for cash and voucher assistance in a humanitarian setting. I'm going to be handing over to Belinda and Zoe and Elizabeth. So Belinda and Zoe from GSMA even, gosh, I can't even say the word right today, and Elizabeth from IRC, and they are going to deliver a presentation for us. During the session, there's going to be plenty of time for you to do your questions, and the way to do this is if you navigate to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little function called Q&A. And if you click on that, a pop-up will open and you can type in your questions for Belinda, Zoe and Elizabeth, and we'll get round to them once we've finished with the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Belinda, who's going to kick off, and I look forward to seeing all your questions pop in and hearing how the presentations go. So over to you, Belinda.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm just going to switch our video off and get the presentation up. Thank you to everyone for joining. Sorry, just getting this sorted.
No worries. Have you got the share button?
Yes, it's just, I think I need to take it out of 1 second. I'd already gone into presentation. Let's try that again.
There we go.
There you go. Sorry about that. Slight technical hitch.
No worries.
So thank you again for participating. We'll be going through a session on IRC's transition to shifting from navigating the shift to digital humanitarian assistance and lessons from IRC. So just to outline the session objectives, I'll firstly just go over who we are, the GSMA Mobile for Humanitarian Innovation team, go through the case study objectives, so giving some background and context around the research and the objectives and the methodology that we took, go through the key insights and lessons learned, considerations, and then a little short segment on the reflection from the IRC from the research that we've taken. So just to start, the GSMA, we are a trade association for mobile network operators, and we represent approximately 750 mobile network operators globally. The Mobile for Humanitarian Innovation team, so M4H, sits within the foundation. We are solely funded by the Department for International Development, and our aim is to accelerate the digitization of humanitarian assistance in context when it is appropriate. As we all know, the scale of humanitarian need is growing, and because of this, there is a huge opportunity for mobile to help people affected by crisis and for humanitarians who are planning to digitize their services. So as you can see from this graphic, over 90% of refugees live in 2 or 3G coverage areas, but we do appreciate that there is still a long way to ensure that everyone has equitable access and can use mobile technology in a meaningful way. And we understand that mobile is not a silver bullet, but we do believe that in the right context and in the ways that it's leveraged, it has a way of help. There is potential for it to really help within the humanitarian sector. Just to give a bit more of a breakdown for the Mobile for Humanitarian team, we're split into 5 thematic areas: mobile money, digital identity, gender and inclusivity, mobile-enabled utilities, and climate change and food security. And these generally represent the ways in which mobile tech can be used in various ways in humanitarian contexts. We believe that all are equally important to build a truly digital kind of society and to build on digital solutions. There are 3 streams within the Mobile for Humanitarian Innovation team: insights and research, where me and Zoe sit, market engagement, which is split into 2 areas: strategic partnerships that work on projects on the ground, connecting mobile network operators and humanitarian organizations to leverage mobile in humanitarian contexts, and the innovation fund that basically funds organizations that aim to do the same. And then we also have a policy and advocacy stream. So the focus of today is mainly on mobile money, but we do touch on gender and inclusivity, which Zoe will go into a bit further in this presentation. And just to highlight a few areas of research that we've done so far, the digital lives of refugees looked in 3 locations in Uganda, Bidi settlement, Rwanda, Kiziba refugee camp, and urban refugees in Jordan in terms of their access to mobile services and the barriers that they face. And kind of leading on from that research, we have also done specific research on looking into the gender gap within refugee context. So for the first time, we sized the gender gap in the context of Bidi. And we also have created 2 handbooks. One of them shown here is the mobile money handbook for cash and voucher assistance within the humanitarian sector, aimed specifically at mobile network operators. But we also have another handbook that looks at what it takes for humanitarian organisations to operationalise mobile money in humanitarian contexts as well. So this research looks specifically into IRC transition to digital assistance. It's not a how-to guide, but is an opportunity to document their experience and hopefully share the lessons learned to the wider sector. So the research question. So as we know, humanitarian organisations are increasingly digitising services, and across the sector, all humanitarian organisations at different stages in their journey towards doing this. We were very impressed with IRC's commitment of 25% of in-kind assistance shifting to cash. So we thought that it would be an opportunity and a good opportunity for us to show what important lessons could be learned from IRC, as they are slightly ahead of the curve in terms of the wider sector as a whole. So the 3 key questions we were looking into were: what motivated IRC's shift initially from in-kind to cash assistance, and then from cash assistance to digital cash assistance? Secondly, we wanted to look into how they did this. So what internal processes needed to change for this to actually take place? And ultimately, an area that IRC was very pertinent and very vocal on us making sure that we showed this this side of the experience was on clients' experiences, and just ensuring and understanding what these specific uptake was in terms of the acceptance of mobile money enabled cash assistance and what that meant for the wider sector. And ultimately, all 3 of these were to ensure that we can get consideration for the broader sector as well, and ensure that other humanitarian organisations could learn from the experience of the IRC. So just to touch on the methodology, we did qualitative research across 6 different countries. 3 of them were face-to-face. Those 3 countries were Burundi, Jordan and Pakistan, but we also did a number of key informant interviews in Chad, Cameroon and Kenya. And our primary focus was on countries where mobile money was used, but many of the lessons learned are applicable and do hold true across other digital modalities. So just jumping into the insights. So motivation in terms of what drove IRC to shift. As we all know, the humanitarian sector has shifted from a period of protracted research on the potential use of cash to strong recommendations of increasing cash. So that was one of the primary primary shifts, like motivations, that growing evidence base. In 2015, the IRC conducted its own analysis in terms of their cash assistance programming and understanding where it would be possible for cash assistance to improve program delivery and outcomes for clients. So they had actually integrated this ambition specifically in their own strategy. The IRC cash strategy for 2015 to 2020, where they had included this aim to achieve 25% of their in-kind assistance to be delivered by cash. So in 2016, the IRC announced its commitment at the World Humanitarian Summit to position itself as a world leader, as well as to influence donor and government policies to encourage cash relief and strengthen coordination of cash across the sector as a whole. So to start off with, it was a kind of an inward look at what it took to transition from in-kind assistance to cash assistance, and then cash assistance to digital cash assistance. And that first step was to align the organisation around the definition and understanding of the term of what it meant and what it truly meant to be digital. And this was actually the first time we, as GSMA, had seen an organisation actually attempting to create this definition so that there was alignment across the organisation prior to the changes being implemented. So there were 3 different stages: non-digital, which is self-explanatory, that is where there is no digital footprint at all. Digital 1 is where there was a digital backend. So any transactions made from the humanitarian organisation side was made digitally, but the recipient or the client on the other end had to access that cash non-digitally. And stage 2 digital is where both the back end and the front end is digital. So the humanitarian organisation makes the transaction digitally, and the client, the recipient on the other end, is able to access that cash digitally. So in the case of a fully fledged mobile money account, for example. And just a very quick note on, just in case anyone's unsure on what mobile money is, it's essentially access to basic financial services, basic but sometimes in certain contexts more sophisticated financial services from a mobile phone. It works on a 2G network, so internet is not necessary, and under GSMA definition you would not need a bank account to access this mobile money account, as the primary premise and the initial reason for mobile money was to provide access to financial services for people who would generally be excluded from traditional bank accounts. So in terms of what it took for IRC to make this shift, there was a change in terms of, firstly, 4 high-level kind of categorizations to do this, in terms of shared vision and then a culture shift. So there was a need to ensure that all staff at HQ and country offices were committed to the cash strategy. So in certain locations, for example, Pakistan, where paper-based systems were more familiar, there was a need for a cultural shift to get people on board in terms of why cash was appropriate in certain contexts. And for outside of the country office context, like headquarters, there was a need for all different departments that may not have necessarily worked together previously having to work together because of this change. So procurement and finance and other departments had to learn new ways of working together. So a cash working group was actually created in 2017 to help with this. There was an overhaul of internal processes and policies. So there was a delineation of roles and responsibilities, and country offices were tasked with developing their own cash strategies as well. That enabled for feasibility assessments, for example, around what modality was most appropriate. There were a creating of toolkits and standardizing operational procedures. So there were 2 in particular that the IRC included. One was the Global Payments Toolkit, which is essentially putting together master service level agreements with payment providers to enable rapid deployment of digital payments. So that would include voucher systems, mobile money providers, and remittance organizations that when, if needed, for a digital payment solution to be activated quickly, these master service level agreements are already in place to facilitate that. And another system that was introduced was CROPS, which is the Cash Relief Operating Procedures, which essentially gave guidance for country offices to follow to operationalize a cash transfer program for 6 different modalities, including Hawala systems, for example, and mobile money. And then there was also the building of internal capacity for digital payments. So hire staff at the HQ level during the transition and creating a training curriculum. And learning by doing was a very big approach that was adopted by country offices, especially in Pakistan, where they were able to do a pilot prior to introducing mobile money to understand what challenges were faced and make changes. And Burundi and Cameroon also were able to learn from their experience from implementation. So I'll go over very quickly the benefits of digital cash, but this is from the IRC's point of view. And Zoe, again, later on, will go through a bit more in more detail what that meant for the beneficiaries and the recipients themselves. But from an IRC perspective, and for the benefits in terms of what the IRC themselves would get, there were 5 key areas. The first is scalability. and the recognition that digitization was necessary and needed for cash to truly scale. For it to get to the same level of use as in-kind assistance, digital was the way forward. Secondly, security. There was a perceived reduction of risk to operational staff that no longer need to travel to transfer cash. Accountability. There was a potential for a reduction in the risk of fraud, as there would be a digital footprint created when using digital payments for assistance. So there's an increase in traceability and transparency. Fourth, speed. So once contracts are set up, which of course can take time, but once they are set up, payments can be made very quickly. And finally, efficiency. So again, in the long run, digital cash can be more efficient. Again, staff not needing to go out into the field, but also multiple cash transfers can be done at the same time. Again, reducing time needed and resources required to deploy cash assistance. And from the client's point of view, again, the IRC's point of view of what the client benefits was discretion and flexibility was first. That, again, from the recipient's point of view, being able to access their cash from a digital modality would likely increase that. Safety and efficiency is essentially the flip side of an IRC benefit, that they would not necessarily have to go to a particular location to pick up their assistance, which can be seen from both sides. But if working well, there is an opportunity for the recipient to take their time in terms of when they decide to cash out. Speed. Payment is essentially instantaneous, especially when considering being sent to a bank account or a mobile money account. Once the humanitarian organisation makes that payment, the recipient receives it straight away. And the multiplier effect actually is a broader benefit. It is the idea of understanding that, yes, the client is able to collect their cash from, for instance, if they were to receive it through a mobile money account, but there is also added value of access to mobile services beyond the cash transfer itself. And ultimately, if we're able to leverage these other opportunities, there's a multiplier effect in terms of leveraging mobile money for cash assistance programs. And finally, financial inclusion. So this is more of an aspirational benefit, and we do understand that it has not yet been achieved, but it's a stretch goal. And again, kind of links back into the multiplier effects option, thinking that if we leverage a technology like mobile phones, there is potential for more than just getting cash assistance into the hands of recipients. So I'll just now move on to our focus on partnerships between IRC and the mobile network operators. Again, this is, even though we're looking specifically at the partnership between IRC and MNOs, there is also opportunity and applicability and relevant learnings from this experience that other private sector players will also benefit from. We also want to kind of convey and continually push the idea of seeing these relationships and these engagements as partnerships rather than a supply-client relationship, to ensure that everyone is able to get as much benefit from the engagement from both the IRC side of things, the mobile network operator side of things, as well as the recipients. And again, just to emphasize that we are not pushing the idea that mobile money is a silver bullet, but we recognize that it's a tool that can be leveraged in a positive way if done correctly. So just to go into the success factors for engaging with mobile network operators as partners. Firstly, time invested early in developing personal relationships greatly accelerated the process of implementing projects. So from the IRC side, process and procedures like the global payments, the GPT, where the master service level agreements are already in place, help ensure that things are able to be done quickly. And on the MNO side, some of our partner mobile network operators, Orange Cameroon and Burundi Econet, for example, had dedicated staff members to working specifically on these partnerships. Secondly, IRC ensured that lessons were documented and embedded in future projects. So IRC Chad and their partner MNO held a workshop to discuss the challenges and document lessons learned into a report, including prospective IRC and mobile network operators and clients for future programs. Third, projects were more likely to succeed when both parties were agile and committed. So I mentioned this earlier, IRC Pakistan were able to conduct a mobile money pilot, and when they were able to do that, they then convened a workshop with the mobile network operator to discuss the challenges and amend services. The MNO was then able to increase and improve agent location and liquidity, and also made sure that they implemented more procedures for clients themselves when any challenges were faced, to kind of improve the kind of speed and flow of the program. And finally, clear alignments on roles and responsibilities. IRC's M&A partners in Pakistan, Burundi and Cameroon mentioned that other NGOs may not have been able to provide the appropriate beneficiary data or other data that was necessary for them to do the job well, but IRC were very good at making sure that they were able to do that. And finally, from my side, just to quickly go over the challenges, one of the biggest challenges was around contracting. So contracting delayed due to insufficient information outlined in RFPs and inadequate and inflexible systems to make any amendments where appropriate. So our example here would be in Jordan, contracting with an M&O was new. So the IRC staff found it quite difficult to know exactly what they should be asking for and how to evaluate bids. So again, an issue on both sides in terms of just understanding the capabilities of each partner and figuring out how best to work together. Secondly, challenges in long-term partnerships with M&Os that were commercially viable. So we understand that from a humanitarian point of view, it's challenging to provide a clear-cut commercial opportunity to M&Os given the uncertain nature of crises in general. So this is something that will always be a bit of a challenge, but something to be cognizant of going forward when working together. And finally, IRC did not leverage the full potential to moving towards digital and financial inclusion for clients. This challenge really is, it presents an opportunity that beyond the first priority of getting cash into the hands of the people, we need to understand and be prudent of the fact that we need to explore more around financial inclusion opportunities for the recipients and clients of cash assistance, especially given the evidence that we found from our research here with the IRC, and which Zoe will go into more detail now. So I will hand over to Zoe.
Great, thanks, Belinda. Hi, everyone. I wanted to go into a little bit some of the results of the focus group discussions we ran as part of this research. In 3 countries, in Burundi, Jordan, and Pakistan, we ran focus group discussions in order to see if some of these perceived benefits from the IRC perspective were being felt by beneficiaries on the ground. So while these results are relatively small sample sizes, we did 2 focus groups in Burundi and Jordan and 3 in Pakistan. They start to give us a little bit of an insight and a taste if these are being seen on the ground. So we wanted to start with the benefits, and you'll recognize these from the previous slide that Belinda did, looking into what IRC thought some of the benefits could be for beneficiaries, and we see that these were some of the same benefits that clients themselves saw. So first being speed and convenience, people were able to receive their money instantaneously and then go to an agent near them to cash out when they wanted to. Second, security, rather than walking home late at night with cash in their pocket, having that on a phone that was PIN protected, people felt safer. Related to that was discretion. Some clients said in some cases, when they received cash assistance before, they were worried that their neighbors or family members might ask to have some of it, but it was more discreet to receive money on their mobile money account. Financial planning and saving, as you'll see in the quote on the right on the bottom, a lot of people talked about being able to save and plan a bit more financially than they normally would be if they had cash, where the temptation is just to spend it right away. So we heard multiple cases of clients keeping the money in their account while they thought about the best way to spend it. And finally, the ability to use mobile money services after the program ended, because of course, when IRC was developing the program, they would set each beneficiary up with a mobile money account that was theirs and to their name so that they could continue to use it and potentially use other functionality after the end of the program. We think that this was an area that could be developed further, but we were already seeing some people use the accounts to perhaps receive transfers from their family in the city or things like that. There were, however, some challenges that we heard from the clients. There would be, in some cases, delays in withdrawing the money, which could negate the discretion benefit if people saw you waiting in line at a mobile money agent to cash out. Similarly, lower levels of literacy hampered the ability to use mobile money, because mobile money is based on text. It sort of requires at least some ability to read numbers and language in some cases. In some contexts, especially in Pakistan, we noted that societal norms prevented the women from accessing and using the mobile phones that they've been given. So it's really important to have interventions surrounding the mobile money transfers to ensure that people can actually use the resources that are allocated to them. And fourth and finally, in some areas, there was weak network coverage, which meant that people were having a hard time actually seeing that the transfers had come in on their phones. So that's one of the reasons that it's really important to assess the local context and the local coverage before deciding to go with mobile money as the modality for cash transfers. And we wanted to pull out 3 factors that we believe IRC had direct control over in affecting these client experiences, because some of these benefits and challenges were outside of IRC's control. The first of these was the importance of training. We noted in many cases where programs were more successful, it wasn't actually reliant on whether clients had used mobile money before, but rather how the training was done. If training was done effectively to make clients comfortable with the phones and the different functionalities of both the phone and the mobile money account, and financial management, those things helped beneficiaries or clients to be more comfortable with this modality of transfer. Second, agent and liquidity management. When IRC worked well with the local mobile network operator and was able to plan to make sure that enough agents and enough cash was available for those agents, it helped affect the beneficiary's experience. And then third was effective communication with clients. So when clients were informed of transfer dates, amounts, and had proper follow-up, they were much better equipped to take mobile money, to understand the programming and feel more comfortable with it. So I'll just go quickly through some of the considerations that we've included in the report are recommendations for the wider sector based on this experience. And these are different considerations that will obviously apply to different organizations differently and need to be contextualized, but these are some of the lessons that IRC learned from their experience. First, in terms of internal processes, and you'll notice these link back quite neatly to what Belinda talked about earlier, but IRC created cross-functional working groups and really tapped into the expertise that existed within the organization. So for them, that meant bringing together supply chain and finance to work with the program teams, really leveraging the experience that they already had internally to create this new form of programming. They also, we found that the technical assistance model worked quite well, where local staff were supported by these TAs who could share knowledge quite quickly. Third, they upskilled staff and created alignment across the organization. It's important to consider, especially how messaging around both the benefits and the risks of going digital, what those are, so that everybody throughout the organization is clear on these. And fourth, promoting cross-country knowledge sharing. We noted that some of the country offices were facing the same challenges, and they didn't have a way to effectively communicate those challenges with each other and have horizontal peer-to-peer country office knowledge sharing. In terms of partnerships, one of the considerations is perhaps it's important to engage with MNOs early to understand their requirements before contracting begins. And that's something that hopefully the technical assistance should be available to engage early to assess different payment modalities, understand the technical requirements, and then communicate those with MNOs to make sure that they're understanding local capacity of MNOs to meet those requirements. Second is understanding how to be a good partner. So mobile money, cash and voucher assistance might need customization, especially when working with more vulnerable groups. So it's important to understand on both sides how to work together to make sure that this is both commercially sustainable and meeting the needs of the humanitarian to meet these more vulnerable populations. So in some cases that might mean co-creating products. And third, we noted that in places where IRC had been able to conduct pilots or simulations before the program began, both parties were better prepared to face the challenges that came with rollout. Similarly, either through these pilots or through workshops, we noted that country offices that had opportunities to reflect on challenges and document those were more successful in addressing these in the future. So it's really important to understand, what are the technical challenges you're facing, documenting those accurately, and then making sure that the right people have access to them. This next point is related to the multiplier effect that Belinda mentioned, but being intentional. If you're using mobile money, then there are additional financial and digital inclusion outcomes that can come with that. If that's a part of the program, if you have the capacity, being really intentional about meeting those outcomes can help multiply the benefits of using this modality. And then finally on partnerships, understanding how to work with the MNO when challenges do arise. Because of course, when you're introducing a new modality, new challenges are going to come that your team hasn't met before. So understanding what are the right channels of communication so that you can solve those problems quickly. And then finally, on the client side, understanding, first of all, what modalities are appropriate for the context and what clients want, what will bring the biggest benefit to clients. So creating frameworks to assess that is really important. Where know your customer issues arise, that means issues with ID cards for registration for SIM cards and mobile money accounts. If there are government restrictions that are inhibiting you to work in that context, you can always reach out to us, the GSMA, as the trade association for mobile network operators themselves, and other actors within the context to try to advocate the government to make sure that the right measures are in place. Innovative financing schemes for more vulnerable target groups can help those target groups access mobile phones, which we think can be a really transformative technology. So if that's a consideration within the program, if you're not supplying mobile phones, one consideration could be providing opportunities for vulnerable target groups to buy those at cost or through various financing schemes that will allow them to access those technology. And related to that, if you're supplying mobile phones or even a SIM card, it's really important to conduct comprehensive training on digital literacy, including risks, so that clients are well equipped to take advantage of the benefits, but also be aware of those risks and protect against them. So I'm now going to hand over to Elizabeth, who's going to take us through some reflections from IRC.
Great, thanks both. Sure, so I think to start with, and you can go to the next slide off, the main consideration, and it was mentioned at the beginning, but the way that we look at programs is that the most important thing to us is how do clients of IRC want to receive money, and are we designing the program correctly for the context and to meet beneficiaries' needs. So we always do start with a feasibility assessment to inform the modality choice. So cash, voucher, in-kind services. So we're looking at the operational factors, of course, like the availability of banking services or mobile connectivity. We're also looking at the market situation. And then, sort of a top priority is the client preference and how they want to receive assistance. So We know that the preference could be informed by how people have received things in the past, how they've received and spent cash, how they've managed their savings, and presenting a new way of doing things might be one way of nudging people in a direction that could provide better longer term financial inclusion. But the balance and the counterpoint to that we try to keep in mind is whether we're pushing people too far in one direction and whether or not we're meeting the main objective of the program. So the sort of reflection point for me on this one, there's a blog that I've often referenced from Chrissy Martin at the U.S. Global Development Lab at USAID, which is called "Do Farmers Really Want to Be Paid in Mobile Money?" And in this example, Ms. Martin uses the example of, if your employer told you that your next paycheck is going to come in Bitcoin, you would probably have some questions about that, right? You would want to know, can you still pay your rent? Can you put it into your savings account? Can this be linked to your debit card so that you can proceed with your daily expenditures? You'd have some questions about that because this is something really new, and you don't know if this is going to work the same way as those dollars going into your normal bank account. So this is something that we're carefully balancing, of pushing for the financial inclusion factors, but supporting people as well. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. And then just to quickly touch on risk, we heard from Belinda that the benefits of digital payments were categorized according to benefits to IRC and benefits to clients. But if we also look at risk in the same categories, it's worth mentioning, I think, in terms of risks to IRC, that we operate in some of the most complex environments in the world, as do many of you. So there is inherently going to be risk regardless of the type of assistance we provide, regardless of the modality choice. So we aim to have the right controls in place. And the way we think of this is the control that we're putting in place in the program proportional to the level of risk presented? So looking at this, like, this is really an evidence-based approach, making a proportional control according to the level of risk. And we know that cash and vouchers are not more risky than other forms of assistance, like in kind, but we know the risks are different. And actually one of the bigger barriers internally is perceived risks of cash. And so we do a lot of work trying to contradict this, that cash will inherently be riskier. And we have to say pretty often, like, no, cash isn't riskier, the risks are just different. And so at the start of a project, we're doing a risk analysis, and we're looking at what the appropriate measure is. Are we going to avoid this risk, manage it? Are we going to transfer it? Are we going to accept the risk and proceed? So one common example of where we transfer the risk is if there's an option to not deliver physical cash, to switch that to digital, or even if there's no digital system in place, if mobile money isn't an option based on the operational context, a hawala is another example of transferring the risk. And then specific to risks of diversion, theft, corruption, fraud, we have the normal controls in place that, my job as a technical advisor to country programs is to go through these step-by-step processes, ensure they're in place. So this is segregation of duties, clearly assigned responsibilities, reconciliation of payments, the vendor and partner due diligence processes, post-distribution monitoring, so that we're asking about any of these risks if people were asked to pay a fee or anything along the way, if they were felt unsafe due to fraud or whatever, theft. So we're asking those questions so that we can follow up if we're finding them. And then of course, security features on our vouchers. And then in a separate category, looking at the potential risks to clients, we have done some research around potential risks to clients. and the results are inconclusive. So we don't have strong evidence from humanitarian contexts to say cash increases the risk of household violence, for example. We want to get more evidence around this and are proceeding. However, what we do know is that there's definitely ways we can improve how we design programs for client safety. So that's what we're focusing on now. And we have developed a toolkit called the Safer Cash Toolkit, and this enables cash practitioners to, in a really easy way, adopt their existing tools to improve how they're doing protection mainstreaming and how they're protecting client safety. Another thing worth mentioning is that, yeah, and you can stay on the previous slide for a moment. In terms of mobile phones, we do have a lot of research showing that this helps women immensely, but we cannot solve, you know, centuries-long patriarchal societal norms. So in emergency humanitarian context, so this is the normal operating context for IRC as a humanitarian organization, we are often trying to address urgent life-saving needs and not looking at broader societal norms. However, in longer term programs where we know there's going to be a protracted period of displacement, for example, where appropriate, we do try to design complementary programs with our cash assistance and to address some unjust norms, like gender discussion groups with men and women, for example, and couples. So these are factors that affect the success of our program and some of our secondary objectives, but we are also cognizant of the fact that donors are often pushing us to be as cost efficient as possible, which is what we also want, and where our primary objective is around meeting basic needs and around food security. Some of these complementary programs that make cash assistance more expensive are not always feasible, but we are sort of advocating where appropriate that those be included. So yeah, and then on the last slide, just sort of reflecting on what's next after this case study. We definitely want to continue with our digital first mentality, which means wherever possible, wherever feasible, we will distribute cash as digitally rather than as physical cash. So this is the preference that we have wherever possible. Secondly, on preparedness, and this was touched on, but we are continuing to put master service agreements at the global and at country level in place ahead of time so that those are ready to go should we need to respond quickly. Continuing to build capacity of our own staff, as well as communicating with our MNOs and other financial service providers about what are the needs that we will have in these contexts, which includes the relationship building that was touched upon. And just with capacity building as well, this isn't just with the traditional economic program staff. We are delivering cash for a variety of different sector objectives. So looking at capacity with our protection staff, with our water and sanitation staff, with our health staff, and where are they using cash, making sure it's used appropriately and that they're prepared to respond quickly and digitally preferred. And then lastly, we're also looking at how do we improve the sustainability of our humanitarian basic needs program, acknowledging that they're designed for essential life-saving assistance, but what are some of the ways that we might be able to have a longer-term impact? So easy wins like training around financial services such as mobile wallets are fairly low-hanging fruit, and we're exploring what some of these might be. So that's all from my side, and happy to take questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, Belinda, and Zoe, for your great and comprehensive presentations. And I'm delighted to see that we've got some questions already coming in from our community. So we'll start with a question that comes from Talitha. And she's asking, how do you change behavior? Because obviously cash is what most people are used to in their preferences. how do you go about trying to change some of their behaviors?
I would say through some of IRC's great training, people got more familiar with the modality and began to see some of the advantages of it. It's of course not right in every context, but in contexts where it's deemed appropriate, that appropriate training is definitely the way to make sure people have the right skills to see the advantages and take advantage of those.
So that training is key.
Yeah, just to give an example of that, and balancing that on like humanitarian mandate versus the financial inclusion piece. Right now in Afghanistan, there's a great multi-agency effort that, within 2 to 3 days of a new displacement, people are reached with cash assistance. It's super quick, it's very agile, we can reach people where they are, and that's delivered through Hawala. However, we know mobile money is starting to become a thing in Afghanistan, and people are not yet familiar with it. But what we're going to do is in certain places where people have mobile phones, where connectivity is good, we'll try a pilot. And where these aren't urgent life-saving needs, more protracted needs, we'll try it. And we'll get feedback from clients. We'll see what more support they might need. So it's balancing both of those needs and supporting people where they are.
Yeah, and just to add, with the research we did with IRC in Jordan, they hadn't introduced mobile money yet. We went out and we found out the perceptions around mobile money, which was in addition to kind of teaching and explaining what mobile money was and what the potential benefits were, and people were very much on board. So as Zoe said, it depends on the context. As Elizabeth said, in some contexts it just doesn't make sense, in certain situations it won't. But I think once people are given the opportunity to know what the potential benefits are, then they're in a better position to understand whether it's worthwhile for them or not.
Great, and Talitha also raises the point around connectivity, and that can be a challenge to have a stable internet connection to enable these kind of things happen. So is that one of the things that you take into place when assessing, and how do you deal with places that have maybe more unstable connections?
Yeah, we do. There's lots of secondary data available on connectivity, so that would be where we'd start during our feasibility assessment, our situation analysis. However, we know that sometimes those maps aren't perfect, and so we also would be going out and testing that and getting feedback from people on how the connectivity actually works for them on the ground in the area where we're trying to operate.
Belinda and Zoe, do you have anything to add, or should we move to the next question?
I think that covered it pretty well.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we've got similar kind of questions coming in from Emily and Salah. So they're looking at sort of partnerships. Obviously, you partnered with the M&Os, often in this particular case study, but are there other actors, such as commercial banks, etc., consortiums that you would consider partnering with in these kind of processes to digitalize aid, or is M&Os the main partner right now?
I think Elizabeth is best placed to answer that one.
Yeah, I guess that's for me. They're not the only partner, definitely not. And in our global payments toolkit, it's not only M&Os who are in that toolkit. We have a variety of financial service providers because we know that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So M&Os are part of the solution. We think it's a great option in some places, especially getting closer to those financial inclusion objectives. However, no, we're looking for a suite of options that can be used based on the context, and trying to get many of those relationships at country level or regional level as well, acknowledging that they're that we want the local solution as often as we possibly can.
And just to add, we definitely advocate for mobile money only in contexts where it makes sense. So if there's like very terrible issues with connectivity or whatever the issue might be, it should be an option, but it's not the only option. It's just in the context where it makes sense, it can be the most appropriate, and it has probably the highest multiplier effects in terms of benefits, but it only is appropriate in contexts where it's appropriate.
Absolutely, and that's where that kind of on the ground research and knowing who the best people to partner with, and just taking that time to assess the environment before jumping in with a solution and not just copying and pasting it from the neighboring country is key, right? Patrick's asked us a question about KYC. What kind of KYC problems, so the validating of people's identity, did you have when shifting to digital payments?
Oh, we have lots of KYC problems. This is a tricky one, to be honest. I know it's the same thing you're all struggling with, but which is why, in a context, say Bangladesh, where refugees are not allowed to register for SIM cards based on government regulations, it becomes an advocacy point. There are mobile money services available. We want refugees to be able to have that. Yeah, that's maybe a bad example because there's bigger problems with cash in that particular context for those who are familiar. But yeah, it's a tricky one and around ID documents. So the balance between sort of like government KYC, government and company KYC requirements, IRC compliance requirements, which we build based on donor requirements, and then the like humanitarian mandate and the problems of lack of IDs. We don't have perfect answers for this, I would say. Where we don't have identity documents, just on the ID piece, we are ourselves assigning unique ID numbers and some sort of beneficiary ID, particularly where we have something with a QR code, or with our digital data collection systems, digital cash out systems. But around KYC requirements, where those are really sticky points, that's where they become advocacy points with governments, through cash working groups or humanitarian country teams. And then I think that's, what is in our control on the preparedness point is where we can flag, in high risk countries, where we can flag these ahead of time and know, oh, that's going to be a problem if there's a big refugee influx. People aren't allowed to register for SIM. So we can start ahead of time when we're, if we focus better on the relationship building, which I think is, that point has come strongly to us, prepare with the relationship side as well. And I think if we can flag those things ahead of time, we may have a little more leverage to advocate around that. But yeah, I don't have a perfect solution. If anyone does, please email me.
Not a perfect solution, but just one point to add is that we do have a policy and advocacy team on the Mobile for Humanitarian Innovation team here at GSMA. And if anyone's facing these sorts of issues, they can reach out to us, and our team specializes on this type of issue.
Great, so there's help out there for those who are struggling with this very issue, which I think a lot of us face, not just in the humanitarian setting either, in many settings. That ID is a challenge for us, for us all in a lot of ways. But great question from Patrick, and also Peter asked a very similar question, so it's good to raise that one. We've got one from Amy before we finish off with one from Irene. So Amy's was about the product co-creation, and whether you meant there was other than direct cash transfer, what kind of example of products you've customized to different vulnerable groups. I don't know if you could just give us maybe one or two examples of products you've customized.
I think that was me that mentioned that in our considerations, and I think by that we were talking about, in the context of cash transfers, that there might be aspects of the CVA programming that needs both perspectives involved, and so the co-creation of that program should involve both perspectives, so that we're sure that when agents need to be involved for certain aspects of training, they are, or humanitarians on the flip side. There are other contexts where products for humanitarian settings are being co-created between these two partners. That's a whole nother subject that we're doing work on at the moment. But in the cash transfer context, there are definitely aspects where it's important to co-create the program and think through what are the different aspects when we can leverage the expertise of each partner.
Yeah, so it involved like training sessions being pulled together collaboratively, but also maybe liquidity management programs. So if there are specific disbursement days or frequencies that happen that can be worked together before time, then it wouldn't be standard operating procedures for a mobile network operator to necessarily send more agents to a particular location. But when working within the humanitarian sector, that is often a need and a requirement, and if the relationship between the mobile network operator and the humanitarian organization is already there, then that can be anticipated and embedded into a program.
And further down the line, it might mean actual mobile money products that are designed for this population, but that's sort of stage 2.
Yeah, and we sort of, that sort of touches quite nicely onto you know, Irene's question, which is, you know, is it feasible to use humanitarian assistance to enhance financial inclusion? And we also had a nice question that kind of connects to that with Ignacio, is, you know, few mobile money systems are used in, you know, G2P social welfare kind of programs. So, you know, are we being realistic in thinking that, you know, mobile money, you know, or digitalizing of payments is actually, you know, gonna work? What are your, I know it's a very hard question to answer, and, you know, I'm not expecting any of you to come up with, but you're you know, an amazing solution. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe I can touch on the first part and let you all comment on the second half. Thinking I mentioned the context of urgent life-saving humanitarian needs. That's probably going to just be cash as quickly as possible. In more protracted situations where we have the opportunity for some of the more time-intensive programs, we are supporting the formation of savings groups, for example. We have sort of a graduation model for those of how they can formally register, where they're interested, and that helps people build their credit history. So some people don't have access to financial services because they don't have credit, but where they are in a savings group that has then, you know, finished their cycle and can formally register with the government, have a bank account, that builds their credit history, which gives them access to credit. Where we have other programs about financial literacy, those are sometimes built in with livelihoods or other recovery programs. So I think, yes, there is a role that we have of linking people with these services based on the context.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth pretty much summed it up. And what I was going to say is that we at the GSMA essentially want to follow that approach, especially as Elizabeth mentioned, in protracted crises, there are opportunities to link to financial and further digital inclusion. It's about creating those opportunities and seeing them. So we can act as that facilitator. That's what part of our role, to try to realize and identify the opportunities. Of course, it's always going to be context specific, but where government to person payments could be linked into humanitarian payments as the nexus gets more and more blurred as crises become more protracted. So we're definitely, it's in our mind. We're not there yet, as you mentioned. The financial inclusion piece is like the golden question that we're all trying to answer, but we definitely are trying to pull those resources together so that where opportunity arises, we can hopefully make those connections happen.
And I think a big part of this work is just educating people to the point that if you are selecting mobile money as the appropriate modality for the context, be aware that there are these benefits that can be tapped into. Of course, that's not feasible to develop programming around in every context, but where you have time, realize that these are additional benefits that can come with using this modality.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, Belinda and Zoe, for taking the time to share your experiences and thoughts with us. I've really enjoyed the session. It's clear for me that there can be significant benefits if we do the assessment correctly, like you said, find the right partner, build those relationships, and make sure that the most appropriate way of accessing cash or digital money is actually addressed in the right situation. So it's been really interesting from that perspective, and I'll look forward to perhaps, you know, in a year or two, maybe having another webinar with you where we can actually start to discuss a bit more about some of the financial inclusion changes and benefits that we can see from this. But yeah, as we decided, it is something for the future, but an amazing aspiration for us all to have and bear in mind as we go forward. So thank you very much for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm sorry we didn't get around to everybody's questions, but I hope we covered most of you. And if you have any more questions, you're very welcome to message me, and I will pass them on to Elizabeth and Belinda. And I'll be sharing a recording of our webinar as well with everybody that signed up, and also on our website. So anybody who missed out today can catch up. Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again in the future.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.